We're live. Action. Just refresh this page so I can see any comments that come in. There we are. Right, okay. Good evening, hope you're all well. Welcome to the July edition of Jonathan and Tony with another special guest today. We've got Peter Rowley. Hi Peter.
Hi Tony, good evening everybody.
How are you?
Absolutely fantastic. What a beautiful day it's been today as well.
Been very, very nice, hasn't it? And just wanted to bring Peter with us really today to talk about possible new changes that are going to be coming afoot with EPC legislation. So if you're a landlord in Grantham or you're looking at becoming a landlord around the Grantham area, in fact across the broader area of the country actually, what we've got to talk about this evening could well be of use to you to know right now. I'm going to try and keep it light. If you've got any questions, please do fire them at us and we can obviously answer those for you live if we can. Jonathan's going to touch a little bit on the ever-changing mortgage market, and it's looking like it's going to change again at some point very soon, so some advice there for you also. And I'm just going to cover off a few bits that regarding property sales in Grantham and the challenges that purchasers are facing at the moment in terms of the hurdles that are in the way in terms of getting your offer agreed and then actually getting moved in. Seems to be quite a challenge at the minute for many. So Peter, this EPC, so an EPC, tell us what it is.
An energy performance certificate. Well, first of all, what it isn't is how an occupier uses the property from their own prospective fuel costs. And I'll give a very simple example. If we had a very, very large house with one person living in that house, perhaps they'll only heat one room, yet that house is designed for the whole family. So the idea of an EPC is to give an average fuel cost for a typical family living in that property, heating that property as one would normally expect for a large family. So don't expect an EPC to predict your specific fuel costs. It doesn't. It predicts an average for a typical use of that property.
And there's no pass or fail. It's an A to G rating, isn't it? From what I recall,
it is an A to G rating. Obviously, if you're at the A end of the scale, it's a bit like your white goods that you buy in the superstores. They have A to G ratings. If it's an A, it'll be an indicator that that property is more energy efficient than a property that's a G rating.
Sure.
Although that doesn't necessarily mean energy efficiency in terms of the actual equipment, it's about the fuel costs. So different fuels have different costs. And I was talking a little earlier, for example, if you had a property on mains gas, it would give a better rating than the same property on LPG gas, because LPG, petroleum. My teeth into order. I'll just call it LPG, propane. It's going to be much more expensive to buy than mains gases, although we all know that gas prices are going up, but equally LPG will be going up as well. So it's about fuel, not just how efficient your property is. It's about how you fuel it. Electric heating tends to be more expensive than gas. So you have to take into account not just the physical fabric, but also what fuel that you're using.
And EPCs have been around now since 2007 with the fabled home information packs that came out in sort of the June time of 2007. Obviously the EPC is the one surviving remainder of the home information pack. Rightly or wrongly, the home information pack I think actually had some good credence because it brought searches to the fore, and I'll talk about that a bit more later on. But obviously they changed home information packs. They didn't need to include a survey, but the EPCs, once home information packs were suspended by the coalition government back in 2010, the EPCs obviously remained, and that applies to every property you've got to market for sale or for rent, and obviously they have a 10-year valid life. Now, what's the changes that are afoot? In 2025 things are going to change.
Yeah, well, what we've got currently is if you are letting a property, it would be normal for you to have an EPC with a minimum of an E rating or better. There are some exemptions, but they are very limited and not easy to obtain. But an E rating is your minimum currently. In 2025, for new tenancies, the expectation is that it will be a minimum of a C, and for tenancies that are in place prior to the 1st of April 2025 and continue, those properties will have to be a C by the 1st of April 2028.
Okay.
So what you have to bear in mind as landlords is if you have a high turnover of tenants, if you've got one that's in place just before the 1st of April 2025 and they leave, say, in 2026, then the next new is a new tenancy, so your 2028 expectation has suddenly been brought forward to 2026.
Okay.
So it's for new tenancies 1st of April 2025 onwards, for existing ongoing tenancies 1st of April 2028.
Okay. So interestingly, this is how I perceive the sort of investor market at the moment. Investors for years have had it very, very good, and many old school investors who have probably had properties in and around Grantham somewhere like 10 to 20 years have actually become really frustrated with the current legislation changes when it comes to tenancies. And I think a lot of the old school landlords are almost at the point where they sort of don't see it as being the great thing it used to be, and they're almost offloading. But there is a new generation of investor out there now who just understands that this is the rules of the game and this is what I've got to play with, i.e. I've got to pay the surplus on stamp duty, I've got to have an E rating currently or a C rating in the future. So there's going to be a lot of landlords perhaps watching this now or watching this on catch up later who are perhaps going to be thinking, crikey, I've got 5 Victorian terraced houses in the centre of town. What's that look like for a landlord going forward?
Well, what you've got is a mix of things with terrace properties. If I was looking to invest myself, I would be looking for the mid-terrace property, because you've only got a front and a back as the external wall surfaces, not an end terrace, because an end terrace has got all the long side.
You call them heat loss parameters, don't you?
Heat loss perimeters, yes.
Yes, that's it.
So it's, if you look at the property, I can tell you the best property to have is a mid-floor flat, which has got a heated corridor servicing it, because you'll have flats either side, no heat loss, the corridor at the back, no heat loss, a flat underneath and a flat above. The only heat loss is the front wall, and that will be your best investment. But coming back to the terrace properties, you need to look at the properties in terms of what can you do, and remember there is a cost cap involved. Currently that cost cap is £3,500. In other words, if you spent that amount of money on the recommendations that appear on the EPC, don't spend it on other things. You don't need to. Spend it on the recommendations on the EPC, and if you cannot get them all done to the point where it will get to an E, that's one of the exemptions. Now that cap is going to be raised to 10,000 to enable to get to a C, but it is a separate 10,000 to the 3.5 that's currently happening. So
I'm Mr. Smiggins. I've got a terraced house at the moment on, for example, Cambridge Street. It's currently an E rating, just about. It's gripping onto E rating. There's going to be this new cost cap comes into place of £10,000. Do I spend that money now?
No, absolutely not. I would absolutely not recommend anybody spending any money on improvements that where their current EPC is valid at an E or better. My advice would be to wait until after the 1st of April 2023, because any expenditure that's carried out on, again, the recommendations that are on the current EPC that you spend after the 1st of April 2023 will be counted as part of the expenditure of that £10,000 maximum cap. Now, what I will say at this point, let's say that you spent £7,000 and you still aren't quite at a C, but the next recommendation would cost £4,000, 7 plus 4 is 11, you would then claim an exemption because you don't have to spend more than £10,000.
Okay. So the advice there is simple, I think. It's very clear as well. Do not start spending money on improving energy assessment ratings until we've gone past April the 1st, 2023.
Absolutely.
Because if you spend it now and you're still not hitting that, you'll have to spend up to another £10,000 to make that happen.
Correct.
So if a tenant is in a property for 5 years, let's say they start a tenancy today, and they're going to move out, we're looking into the future now, they're going to move out on the 29th of July 2027.
Yes.
At what point do you need to spend that money if they're on just a set tenancy?
That would be, because they will be in place before the 1st of April 2025, it is at the point that they leave that becomes an issue. And
if I had that same tenant but was doing yearly contracts and yearly new agreements, would I then have to spend that money beforehand?
Well, one of the changes to the rules that is being clarified, I wouldn't say it's a change, it's actually a clarification, is that any lease renewal will be considered to be a new tenancy.
Okay. I just want to bring Jonathan in on this. So, Jonathan, what have you seen on the mortgage front in relation to EPCs? And have you back to black your hair?
Have a what?
Sorry, go on. Sorry, carry on. I don't know, you're just looking very dark.
Dark?
Yeah.
Not as tanned as you though, Tony.
No.
The old fake bake.
So coming back to the original question,
Yeah.
Before I was waylaid, so with mortgages, do you see a future where mortgages and rates that are offered are connected to energy efficiency?
Well, even at the minute, there are lenders who, you know, especially because there are some lenders that will do up to 80% loan to value, for example, for a buy-to-let. The majority are 75%. But there are some lenders, even now, that are stipulating that it needs to be a C rating.
Even now?
Even now.
Right.
You know, TMW is an example.
TMW is...
the mortgage works,
Okay,
sorry.
Speaking of...
Yeah, speak English,
yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, so the mortgage works, yeah, it needs to be a C if it's 80%, for example. So lenders are already putting in place things to try and sort of get ahead of the game.
Sure.
As such.
Okay. And do you think at some point in the future we're likely to see EPCs affecting things like your council tax banding, energy efficiency?
Well, there has been lots of talk about linking the EPC rating to council bands and rewarding those people who've got good EPCs and almost like penalising the ones that have got the poorer ones. Now, what I find is that's a little bit of a catch-22 because often the people with the poorer ratings are the people who can't afford to improve as much as they'd like to. So it seems to be a catch-22. I think it will happen at some point, but I think that's a bit further down in the long grass at the moment because I think they want to get this first hurdle out the way.
So, so I'm a landlord again. I've got a couple of Victorian terrace houses. Notice that I'm talking about Victorian houses without cavity wall fill, no opportunity to put cavity wall in. There are ways to make these, and the reason I keep talking about Victorian terrace houses is I suspect the majority, if you were to analyse the Grantham stock of rental property, I would think 40 to 50% is Victorian terrace stock.
I concur with that, Tony. I concur with that, Tony.
So when it moving forward, we're not going to see a glut of landlords selling because they can't make these places efficient. There are ways to be able to get exemptions, and therefore there's no major panic as such. But it is useful information to know without a doubt.
Well, I would say to one of the things that is being proposed, and I do emphasise they are proposed at the moment, is that the government are looking as part of this new legislation to make fabric first measures the first step. They haven't quite worked out how they would do that, but if you were having to pay for the external wall insulation, that could be quite a significant expenditure. Although there are grants available, and it does depend upon the tenant in place and whether you can get that for either a highly subsidised rate or even free. But if you can't get it subsidised or free, currently I would look at actually thinking of the PV panels on the roof. 4 kilowatts of PV will cost you maybe £5,000 or £6,000 and will make a difference of between 11 to 14 points on your EPC. That would
take you up probably 2 bands, wouldn't it?
It can, in some cases, take you up 2 bands. Whereas the solid wall insulation is addressing the heat loss, and quite rightly too, but will probably make at best 6 to 8 points difference, and would probably cost you £10,000 to do.
Wow. Okay. You're a very generous guy with your time, Peter, and thank you very much for coming this evening. But if there's any landlords out there looking for some advice and guidance on this at the moment, would you be happy to be able to perhaps field a few questions from them or calls from them, Penny?
Absolutely. If anybody who wants any guidance or advice, they're happy to contact me. Do you want me to give the...
Oh, yeah, we can pop them in the comments after. I think that's probably...
That's fine. Well, I'll leave that to Tony to put my details. Feel free to contact me and I'll help where I can. 2 things,
Peter. Celia Atta. Can't fault Peter at all. Super quick turnaround between me ringing and his son coming out. So we've got a fan online.
Thank you, Celia.
And Joanna Plant, who's somebody I've met on a couple of occasions. Joanna is a investor in the area. So she's commented with some lovely feedback. Thank you, Joanna, saying great live. What about listed buildings? Not possible to insulate walls, etc., and energy efficiency works may not be consistent with planning law. So what's your thinking there?
Okay, if we, first of all, let's talk about listed buildings and EPCs first of all. One of the confusions is that whether a listed building needs an EPC or not currently. I'm not going to go into all the whys and wherefores why that happened, but what is going to happen in the new legislation from the 1st of April 2025, irrespective of whether the property is a listed building or irrespective of whether it is in a conservation area, an EPC will be required. So that will put that to bed, so to speak. Where a conservation officer says quite categorically you cannot do new windows, if that's one of the measures you were going to do, or external wall insulation, which is obviously going to alter the character of the building, then if those are the measures that would get it to C, and you're not being allowed to because a third party is stopping you doing that, the conservation officer, you would claim an exemption from achieving the C rating. So that is very clearly laid down. At the moment, it's a bit of an onerous task because you need to get that in writing from the conservation officer. I'm not sure what they're actually going to do in terms of making that part of the process simpler. They've said they're going to try and make it simpler. We haven't seen the detail yet, so I think that's a case of watch this space at the moment.
Okay. Hopefully that helps, Joanna. Thank you very much for your question. It's really nice to get people's engagement on this because it is a two-way platform. It's not just us talking about what's going on. If there's any questions at all, this is why we do this, really, to give people that sort of forum to be able to chuck questions in that they don't normally. Who do you turn to?
Indeed.
So where do you find it? You perhaps Google it, but you can get a mismatch of information there. This applies to mortgages particularly, and EPCs and everything else. So that's what we do this for, is to give people a way to get in touch and
just
chat.
to add on to that, Tony, as well. There's lenders who, well, more and more lenders that are coming to the space with green mortgages as well.
Okay.
So if you've got an EPC rating of an A or B, for instance, then you could possibly get a cheaper mortgage rate.
Okay.
More cash back, for instance. So there's more and more lenders that are actually coming to that space at the minute.
Yeah, great stuff. Okay. A couple of challenges that I just want to talk about as an agent operating in the area. So I'm very lucky that I get to work exclusively really with people who sell houses in NG 31, 32 and a little bit sort of 23 and 13. At the moment there's some definite difficulties for buyers who are sort of going through that conveyancing process. Now obviously Jonathan has a part to play in some of that when he's doing the mortgage application and putting the submission through. We obviously then sort out a surveyor's visit for a mortgage valuation usually, or a desktop assessment is done by the surveyor. But the biggest challenge at the minute is actually to do with searches. So the local authority, which is in Grantham, SKDC, not the same in Bottisford, that's Melton Borough Council. And Melton Borough Council at the moment will get legal searches back to their solicitors who have ordered them within 3 to 5 working days, which I think is phenomenal. It's a fantastic turnaround. But in Grantham, which is SKDC, so this applies to anywhere where your SKDC home is, the turnaround time at the moment is reported to be 40 working days, and I can assure you in the real world it's not. It's probably more like 45 to 50 working days, so around 9 or 10 weeks. Now that adds extra problems because when you're buying a property, usually you will instruct a solicitor, and if you're a buyer, they will expect the draft contract to come back in from the seller. The draft contract usually wants to be sent over as soon as it can be, really, to lock in that buyer. Now, if there's a delay there, the solicitor won't then order searches or take money from the client who's buying until they've got the draft contract in their possession. So there's two things there, really. As a seller, we must be getting our draft contract sorted ASAP. I would instruct the solicitor as soon as you go on the market, because then you can get that paperwork to you, you can get it filled out, and when the buyer's found, bang, we can get them draft contracts issued to the buyer's solicitor. At that point then, the buyer's solicitor can then pay for the searches and order the searches. But if you're taking a couple of weeks to get your paperwork back, then it takes a while to get over to the buyer's solicitor, and then they order searches. Not only will you have that delay, you're going to have another 10 weeks on top. The problem with this is, as people try to build chains, mortgage offers can expire.
Yes.
Categorically. 6 months, some of them 3.
Some 3 or 4, some
right.
A lot of them 6.
Okay. Once the searches are back, the legal teams then will answer questions, well, they call them inquiries, we call them questions, about the return of those searches. Some solicitors are switched on. Some solicitors will start raising pre-search inquiries, which means they're doing as much on the file as they can do before the searches come back. But a lot of solicitors will park that file there and they'll pick it up when they get the searches back and not before. So you must make sure that you understand what your solicitor and your conveyancer is going to do for you in this process. I have been speaking with the leader of SKDC. I have written to the local MP. I do want to change this. It's quite embarrassing when there's 340 borough councils in the country and Grantham is highlighted as being the top 9 in the top 9 worst in the country. So we must try to do something on this. But I think in the short term, whilst they're trying to fix the problems, which are typically revolving around understaffing and various other things, then we just have to do the right thing for the clients, and that's advise them in the right way to make sure that that delay is as short as it can be, but we've got to allow at least 9 or 10 weeks at the moment for those local searches.
And just to add on to that, in terms of mortgage offers, that can present other problems as well, because if your mortgage offer expires, a lot of lenders, you'll need to pick a new product.
Right.
And obviously if you locked in and secured your deal 4 months ago, for instance, chances are your rate's going to have gone up quite a lot. So that could potentially mean that you can no longer afford the mortgage. Potentially.
Could have a change on things, can't it?
Exactly, yeah. So
now,
that's
the last interest rate announcement was at the start of July. We've got one pending, haven't we, in the next week or so?
We have, yeah.
What's the thoughts?
The prediction is 0.5% increase.
Okay. What are lenders doing right now?
Well, rates at the minute, ultra low rates have gone at the minute. Lenders are very busy, timescales are really stretched. There's lenders out there who are taking 25 working days.
A month?
Yep, to assess documents. I won't mention lenders' names, but there was one lender and they took 16 working days to assess one single document.
Okay.
So, and what's happening is, because lenders are inundated, they're increasing their interest rates.
Right. So that tap's turning off.
The tap's turning off, to try and stop the flow of applications.
Yeah.
So, you know, for example, I sourced a 5-year fixed rate deal today, 65–70% loan to value, so lots of equity, lots of deposit, and it was around 3.3%.
Right, okay.
You know, 6 months ago that would have been 1%, 1.5% less.
Yeah, okay.
So you can see the big difference there.
Yeah. And lenders, in my experience, you know, when we're coming close to a new Bank of England interest rate announcement, lenders will react first, won't they? Usually they're predicting.
Usually they are, but they'll be, you know, once a rate increase is announced, they'll be on it that day.
Yeah.
Okay, so what might happen, for instance, is, you know, if someone comes to speak to me the day before the Bank of England base rate increases, the chances are that product will be withdrawn the day after.
So I see a lot of buyers, I speak to a lot of buyers, obviously one of the questions when we're talking to buyers about their position and what they're looking to do, and if they're in first time buying or whatever they're doing, is, you know, when did they get their agreement in principle? Again, it's quite commonplace to have had an agreement in principle maybe for 6, 8, 10 weeks, still technically valid according to the date on the paperwork.
60 to 90 days validity normally.
So there we go. And then, but that can be a very different scenario when you come to submit the formal application, can't it? Because that rate is not protected at that point.
I was just about to say that. A lot of people are under the misconception that you secure a rate at decision in principle stage, and that is not true. You do not secure any rate at all. You only secure the rate once a mortgage application has been submitted. So, for example, I had a client this week. I got them a decision in principle 3 months ago, came back to me, and the rates have gone up by over 1%.
Right.
And now what they wanted to buy is unaffordable for them. So that's really what's happening at the minute.
So we have to remember that borrowing money to buy a house is still blooming cheap.
It is, yeah, absolutely.
Ridiculous cheap. The problem we've got is 13 years, there's a generation of buyers out there now and homeowners out there now who have only ever known 0.5% or 0.1%.
Yeah.
The average of the last 40 years, I believe, is 5.6%.
Yeah.
So we are still very, very cheap to borrow money, aren't we, at the moment? We've just had it so good for so long, haven't we?
Yes.
Why are they increasing Bank of England's base rate interest rates?
Well, essentially, it's to you know, try and combat inflation, essentially, by putting up the rates.
Yeah.
You
So
know,
the purpose of doing all this, with inflation getting out of control, basically people spending too much money, aren't they, on stuff?
basically, yeah.
To control that, they try to limit the amount of disposable income you've got to go out spending.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the reason. So yeah, it's having quite a big impact at the minute, affordability wise. But I did want to just briefly touch on. Obviously, we didn't do one in June, did we? We didn't do a live in
I
June.
think we had a summer sabbatical.
We had a break. But quite a big change is happening in the market and is coming into force on August the 1st around mortgage affordability.
Okay, just hold that thought.
Okay.
Just coming back to Peter. Angie Greensmith. Hi Angie, hope you're well. Very interesting. Didn't realise about the £10,000 max spend upgrade in EPC and not starting it until after April 23. Thank you so much. And also Joanna Plant says thank you, very, very helpful. So that's good. Just carry on where you were then, Jonathan.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, so mortgage affordability. So there's a change coming in 1st of August, and just to give everyone a bit of a background story. So mortgage lenders currently have to follow rules on affordability, which is set out by the Bank of England. Okay, and these affordability tests were introduced back in 2014, along with loan to income cap flow limits as well, which restricts the number of mortgages that can be extended beyond 4.5 times income. Okay. Now from August the 1st, the Bank of England are scrapping the affordability test. Okay. Now the affordability test.
I know you say Bank of England there.
Yeah,
Okay.
Bank of England.
Yeah.
Yeah. So currently, if you take out a fixed rate, obviously it's fixed for 2, 3, 5, 7, maybe 10 years. Okay. And at the end of that fixed rate, you go on to a reversionary rate, lender standard variable rate, which is very often higher than the fixed rate that you've currently been on. Okay. Now, currently, the affordability model, you have to prove at the outset that you can afford to pay 3 percentage points higher than the reversionary rate, which will obviously mean that you won't be able to borrow as much. Okay. So that element is being scrapped from August the 1st. However, the loan to income cap of 4.5 times, that particular rule is not being changed.
Okay.
And that particular rule has a sort of a bigger impact from an affordability point of view, because it limits the amount of borrowing that you can take depending on what your overall income is. Okay. So and one of the big reasons why this affordability test review and change is coming into place is because of asking prices for homes across the UK. So currently, according to Rightmove data, the average asking price for a home is 368,000. Okay, so that's why the Bank of England are bringing into place these rules.
Yeah.
But so in some cases, it might mean that prospective purchasers might be able to borrow a little bit more money. Okay, but as I've said, that loan to income flow limit of 4.5 times is still going to be in place, which will still restrict the amount that lenders will lend, because of course lenders still have to be seen to be lending responsibly.
Sure.
Okay. So, but that's a really big change. I think it was announced. It was announced a few months ago now. I think, but
we talked about it.
but it's coming into force August the 1st.
Yeah, and another fantastic mortgage advisor, I know a couple of them, and Kieran's another one. This time last year, Kieran, I think we were on the beach at Mablethorpe. Kieran's up in Leeds, so you don't need to panic.
Hi, Kieran.
But he's just commented that whilst the rates are low, the house prices, a multiple of incomes has never been higher.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more with that.
Yeah,
But he has also great. Thank you, Kieran. Sort of great chat, by the way. Couple of last things, really. Don't want to mention the C word too early. We're allowed to mention the C word?
What C word?
Is this for Christmas?
Christmas. Yeah.
Yeah. we are now, you know, August, September, October, November, December. We are 5 calendar months away from Christmas. If you are looking to make a move before Christmas, you really need to be considering your actions right now, because to list your house and then sell it, yeah, that's the relatively easy part, but don't forget that conveyancing challenge I've been talking about. If the SKDC searches don't get better, we're still going to be looking at transactions taking probably at best 4.5, 5 months. Having said that, I did have one listing come to the market in Carlton Scroop on the 1st of June, which is exchanged this week. So it just goes to show sometimes with the right conveyancers, the right buyer, the right seller, a lot of motivation, things can be done quite quickly. That was without searches because they were, I think they were doing it with an indemnity insurance to overcome that. Some lenders do indemnity insurances against searches, don't they?
They do, but you need to be a cash buyer though, don't you?
No, I think you can get an indemnity insurance against delayed searches.
Oh, delayed search.
Yeah, delayed searches.
Delayed search.
Yeah.
But obviously, if you're a cash buyer, you don't have to have searches,
Sure.
do you? So.
Kieran, if you're free next time, if you want to come down to Grantham, we'll change it over a bit. I'm only joking. Anyway, I think that's half an hour rattled by. I don't know where that time's gone. Thank you, Peter, for coming today. Really, really appreciate your time. You're always generous with your time and your knowledge, and I always learn something when I sit down and speak with you, so I can't thank you enough for coming. And thank you once again to Jonathan as well.
Yeah. I just want to say as well, I'm doing a video next week, guys, on CIS borrowers, so construction industry scheme. You know, and looking at how lenders treat you, whether employed, self-employed, and you know how you can potentially borrow more as well. So stay tuned for that next week.
Thank you. Any questions in the interim, just drop it in the chat and we'll do our best to get back to you and answer them. But thank you very much. Have a fantastic evening and a wonderful weekend.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.